Hello, my name is Ben Vinoy and welcome to our second bookbinding video. In our first video, we showed an extensive step-by-step process of taking apart a factory-made Bible and remaking it into a leather-covered Bible with a paper liner. In this video, I'm going to show some advanced features that hopefully will take your bookbinding to another level, with showing you how to do a leather liner, also showing you how to do an extended yap, which is the edges of the Bible cover, and we're going to show a full yap for a compact Bible, which is actually the regular thickness of a full-size Bible. So we're not going to be sacrificing anything by doing a smaller Bible. It's just going to be a little bit less leather to work with. Another thing that we covered on the last video was an extensive list of materials, and so we're not going to go over all of that information in the last video. If you feel like that you're missing something from the process that we're doing here and you haven't yet purchased our first video, please purchase the first video, and that'll fill in a lot of the blanks for what we're doing now in the second video. So let's go ahead and get started on this Bible. All right, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add art gilt to the edges of this gold Bible. And so what I use to do that, I use these cotton ovals. This is like, you can find this in the makeup section of your grocery store. And I get the large size pads, and these are just easier for me to work with. I usually take 3 pads for my inking, and then I get 1 clean pad just for taking off the excess ink. So what I've done on this book block is I've already taken this Bible apart. I've stripped off all of the glue here. There's nothing left here but the sewing. And I've also sanded the outside of this last end page, because we're going to go ahead and keep that in there, and that'll make it so that whenever I glue the leather liner on there, it'll stick to this leatherette paper, which is like a polyvinyl coating. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with this. Here's my this is the ink that we use, and it comes in several colors. And probably 3 of the most popular colors that I use is this plum and cobalt. It's like burgundy. This is like a nice royal blue. And then also this red geranium, which is a nice red color. So this is the one we're going to use for this Bible. You can also, if these ink pads get dry, you can buy refills that come in little bottles like this. And it comes in all kind of different colors, and basically all you do is squeeze more ink into your ink pad if it gets dry. I'll just show an example of what that looks like. I have a little bit of ink here, so I'll just squirt it on there and it soaks in, and then we're ready to go. So what I do is I use the smooth side of the cotton pads, and I just fold those 3 pads together like that. It gives me a good handle to grip onto, and you just daub onto your ink pad like this. For this, I'm going to fan out the deck like this. Basically what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing the Bible and pushing it over to fan out that deck as well as I can, and then I just pinch it firmly with my fingers like this on the side and push it down on some kind of surface that I'm not worried about getting ink on. If you're worried about getting ink on this black paper, you can actually tape this off with some masking tape. I'm not too worried about it, and all I do is I daub that ink on, rub it on like this. And you can go light if you'd like, Takes a little bit of practice to get it perfectly even, but the easiest way to get it even is to just do it nice and dark, the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do it another coat. Okay, now that I've done that side, what I do is I'll flip it over and do the other side now. See if I can do it this way so you can see a little better. All right. You can see on this side, now that I've flipped it over, it already has a little bit of red ink, but it's not as dark as the other side was. So I don't have to go over it quite as much as I did as on the other side. I just want to get it to where it looks how the other side did and everything looks uniform. So that's basically it for that side. And then all I do is wipe off any excess with my clean pad. Right now, to do the ends, I just fan it like this with my hand. You don't have to lay it down for this part. And what I do is I just brush. This part you got to be a little bit careful when you're going to do this end part, because it will shred your pad. It is possible that you can spray this ink also. I've never done it, but I'm sure you could if you had the right kind of sprayer. I wouldn't use a cheap like paint sprayer to do it. I would use like a, oh, I can't even remember what that, cup sprayer I think it's called. Okay, so I fanned it the other way. Didn't explain what I was doing. Explain it on the other side. So I basically got this side done, and then, you know, you're just gonna wipe off that excess off of the outside gold. And you can kind of see it's made it sort of have a copper appearance. This is the regular gold, and then that's the gold with the red, and it does give it more of a copper appearance. So what I'm gonna do whenever I go, I'm gonna show you how to do some gilt lines on the inside liner. When I get ready to do that, I'm gonna use a copper foil, which will match a little bit closer with this, as you can see. Okay, so one more time for this last edge. It's kind of good I'm using a small Bible too, because it's not going to take quite as long as it would a full-size Bible. Okay, one side, fan it the other side. And once it looks even, lay it flat and clean off the excess. Okay, so that's pretty much ready now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the leather liner now. So you can just, if you have some good usable pads there that don't have ink on them, you can reuse those again later. But any ones that have ink on them, I just throw them away. Okay, so the next part that we're going to do now is we're going to take a couple of black pieces of leather. This is going to be my leather liner, and they need to be bigger than your Bible, obviously. So these pieces really only need to be 3/4 of an inch longer than my book block here. And these are quite a bit longer than that, maybe 1.5 inches longer, but that's okay. Bigger is better. I mean, it doesn't hurt to be a little bit over. Of course, if it's too short, then that's when you have a problem. How we prepare this is, first what we're going to do is we're going to taper one edge of the leather. And I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So I'm basically just tapering one edge on that one, and then I'm tapering one edge on this one. Now, a lot of leather-lined Bibles that you have seen out there whenever you open up the Bible, you can see where that edge of that leather underneath the paper is a very defined line. The Bibles that I do are not going to be like that. So to explain what I'm talking about, on the inside of a liner, you would see a bulky line underneath the paper here where it would be very defined that the leather's underneath there. The way we're going to do it, it's hidden. So it's a nicer looking finish in my opinion. Okay, and we're also going to show how to do these gilt lines around the inside liner and the tooling lines like this as well. Okay, so once you have your leather tapered like this, now we're ready to add the paper to it. The paper just has to be bigger than your book block. This is a taffeta textured cardstock paper that we get at Hobby Lobby. And all we do is we flip it over onto the smooth side. So we're going to leave the outside finish clean. Flip it over, and we're going to glue here. About 5/8 of an inch is how far we go in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my piece of leather with the tapered side. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of my self-healing mat here. This mark from the 0 to the bottom of the mat is a 1/2 inch, so that's how far I'm going to glue my paper on there. So I'm going right to the 0 mark. And that one's done. I like to take a rag and just wipe that glue off so that it doesn't build up. All right, my second one. Lay it down. We're using Jade 403 bookbinding glue. This is not Elmer's glue. I'm just using an Elmer's glue bottle. You get those kind of questions a lot. It's a good thing that this happened. So just when you lay your paper down on your surface, you want to make sure that you don't set it down in some wet glue so it doesn't get gunked up. Okay. Back onto my 1/2 inch mark there. Okay, so we're basically done with our leather liners now. And what we'll do is let those sit for just a minute and dry. Okay, so now we have our leather liners made. And right now you can kind of see where it looks like the paper is a little bit wavy right now. Whenever that paper dries out completely, those ripples will basically go away. So, but at this point, we're ready to go ahead and mark these and trim them. And the way we do that is we basically just fold these like this. And what I do is I push it until it finds that stop. And then once it finds that stop, I'll take my roller and make sure to crease that real good right there. And we'll just repeat that process for both of these. Okay, once I have done that, now I'm ready to lay my Bible on my liner. And so the easiest way to do that is to do it from this way and I can see. And so there's a curve in the book spine that's like this. And so I want it to continually match that same curve that the paper is doing. I want it to match the edge of the back of that leather. So that's what I'm looking for here. And then once I find it, I'll flip it over. I can mark it with a light colored pen. I think in my last video I had some different pens. These Pilot G2 pens are actually better, and they do make a gold one, and the silver one is very good also, and then they also have a white one which works well also. I don't have a gold one right now, so I'm just going to use my silver one, and just be careful. So just like the other Bible, what I'm going to do is I am going to mark. I'm going to make a small mark here, small mark around the corner on both corners, and then a small mark here. And the reason that I don't trace the entire book block is because when you do that, you tend to get a glob of glue that gathers on the tip of the pen, and then that can either get on your paper or get on your Bible, and it makes a mess. So this is a way to keep it neater and cleaner. And then we'll just repeat that process. Whatever side of the Bible that was the front. I want to make sure to label this as the front. You can mark it here too. It's actually better if I use silver Sharpie, shows up better. Okay, I'll go ahead and mark this one now. This is going to be the back. And make sure you don't mark on the back of the paper, because this is going to be a finished part in the Bible. Okay, so now for the back, find the back of my Bible. Here's the back. Find my edge, flip it over, mark it. Okay, now I'm ready to cut. When you cut these, unlike the paper, this leather will move around. So when we do our first cut, we need to make sure that we have it firmly in place with even pressure. You don't want to have pressure on one side like this or pressure on one side like this. It needs to be even pressure here. And then you just simply put, just like we did for the paper liner, you simply put it on there. And I'm going to use a sharp box knife. I'm kind of breaking the rule. I said in the last video it was going to be harder to cut with this, which it is. But if you have a brand new sharp blade on your roll cutter, it will actually be probably better to use this. But so that I don't get any tearing effect from having a dull blade, I'm going to use this. Just make sure it doesn't move when you're cutting. Sometimes it takes a few slices. Okay. Trying to work a little bit fast so that this doesn't end up being the longest video ever. Okay. Since I'm doing the ruler cutting, I'll just do them both at the same time. Cutting off our pen marks. That's all we're cutting off. Okay. Now that we've got all of that cut, I'm going to cut the corners. I use my smashed penny. Has a little bit more of a sharp tip on it. And I just want to cut off that pen mark. I don't want to cut off any extra. Okay. There's one. Now at this point, your leather liner is basically ready to install. You can put it on just like this, and it's ready to go. And if you want to get an extra fine finish, which is the way that I do it, I'll show you how I do the extra fine finish on this. And what I'm talking about here is on the inside of this liner, you can see where the liner meets the cover. It's a very smooth transition. You don't see a raw edge of the leather. Whereas if I were to just glue this liner into a cover now, you would see that raw edge of this leather where I've cut it. So what we're going to do is we're going to taper the edges of these liners. So with a real sharp paring knife, I'm basically just going to pare the edges of this liner. I'm being more careful now than I was when I tapered this other edge, because this is actually going to be a finished surface. Sometimes you can go back over it a couple times. This may be a little bit more intricate than what you really want to do. Don't feel like you have to do this step. And sometimes if your knife gets a little bit dull, use your leather strop. Get that fine edge back. You can see here on the edge, I've got a little bit of fuzz sticking out. That'll show whenever you glue your liner down if you don't trim that off. So you can take your knife like this and get that little stuff. Or you can flip it over. You can flip it over like this and put a straight edge on it and neatly just trim off any little fuzz that sticks out on this side. So that's basically ready now, and basically just repeat the process here. It is possible to add the gold lines onto the liner after you glue the liner onto the Bible, but it's easier if you do it before you do that. So we're going to do the gold lines on the liner next. Okay, so now we're ready to add the gold lines. I'm actually going to use the copper foil. It's a copper foil. I just got this off of eBay. Just look for a hot stamping foil, and you should have stuff come up that looks like this. What I've done is I've cut 2 small squares. I'm going to use these to do the corners first. And the tool that we use, the hot tool that we use, is this. This is actually a wood burning, like soldering iron. And the reason that I like this one is it has a variable heat setting on it, and I put a little black mark on mine so I can see where I like to put it, which it's like halfway in the middle of the orange section, the yellow section right there. Okay, and it's been heated up for a while, so it's ready to go. So in case it gets too hot, you can keep a wet rag by your side and just kind of take a little bit of that heat out of it in case it's too hot and it's melting your foil. Okay, so what I do is I just take that foil and I put it right on the corner of the liner like this, and then I'm going to take my little round wheel. This is like a little nut off of a scooter. I'm going to put it to where it is like 1/8 of an inch from the edges of the leather on both sides. So 1/8 of an inch on this side, 1/8 of an inch on this side. And then once I get it where I like it, I'm gonna trace around it about 1/4 of the way. Usually go back and forth a few times. Once I pull this off, if I don't like the way that it looks, I can go over it again. So the way that I'll do that is I just put it on there again. I'm going to eyeball 1/8 of an inch. Hopefully you can get good at eyeballing 1/8 of an inch. Look down here at your little measurement to help you and get it in place. I'll just go over it again. And that's my corner. Now I'm going to repeat that on the other corner. Eighth of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a second pass on that one again. And there's that. If you mess up and you put some gold where you don't like it, you can actually kind of erase it. I'm not going to erase this, but I'll show you how you can do that. What you actually use is a Q-tip, and those are Q-tips that I get also at the makeup department. Okay, so if you mess up on your tooling line or your gold lines here, you can actually erase this off of the leather. And the way that I do it is I get these like little applicator Q-tips. These you can also get in the makeup department at your grocery store. And I use either like a Skidmore's, this is a waterproofing beeswax leather conditioner, or I just use regular mink oil. Either one of those works. And you just get a little bit of mink oil on there and then basically just rub the gold off. Or if it's just a very small spot, you can actually get a toothpick and get a little bit of oil on it and actually touch up that little section and just use it like a little finger and basically rub off the part that you don't like. Okay, so once you get it to this point, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my roll of foil here and I'm going to go about 1/8 of an inch over on this side and 1/8 of an inch over on this side, and I kind of mark it with my fingernail there, lay it on my mat, and I'm going to cut it on my mark. And then once I got it cut on my mark, I'm going to put this foil on here, centered, and about even with the bottom of my leather. I want the leather to stick out a little bit so that I can see where the bottom edge of that leather is. But then I'm going to take my straight edge ruler, my metal ruler, right here. Really smooth. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna put it about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom there. I can see my gold lines a little bit there and a little bit there, and I'm basically just gonna join these two little quarter circles together with my soldering iron. Okay. Now, it didn't really take right there in the middle. Sometimes that'll happen. So I'm going to go over it one more time. Different leather will do better or worse sometimes. It just depends on what leather you're using. Usually I'll use, like lambskin usually works really well. This is, I think this is called naked cow skin. And it's probably not the best leather for this, but we'll make it work. So this time I'm going to press a little bit harder in that middle area. And you can go over this several times if you need to. I don't like to do it more than 2 or 3 times, but you can do it as many times as you need to get it right. Okay, if you get to the point where it's like I have to do it again now, so this is a 3rd pass. Now I'm going to use the line where I got that gold off. I'm going to find the edge of my leather in that little window on the foil. And you can still see the little corners of your first marks that you made for the corners. You can see them. You're gonna eyeball that same 1/8 of an inch mark, and then we're gonna just take a 3rd pass at it here. It's possible you may have to adjust your heat on your tool if you're having difficulty getting it to get a good mark. Okay. All right, so for the side, I'm going to do the same thing, except for on this one, I'm just going to go about 1/8 of an inch over my little corner mark there. And I'm going to find that edge of the leather in my little blank spot in my foil now. Same thing over here on this side. It's actually a little more helpful if your foil is a little bit wider than this. This is very narrow, so it's kind of a challenge trying to get this down where it needs to be. But I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch here to here, and try not to go over your paper because it will make a foil mark on your paper real easy. So you can kind of find a stop with the edge of the tool. You feel where it stops. and then just go all the way to that corner, back and forth a few times. I'm going to go over this another time. And when I do this, you want your long end to be over here on the paper side. Okay, so both of our liners now have the lines on them, and we're ready to glue it onto our book block. So I'm going to find, this is the back. Now on this one, I'm going to glue just a little bit past the leather onto the paper. You can kind of go by the glue marks that are on there, but you don't necessarily have to go exactly by that. Okay, so I have those edges glued. Just match up your edges here. Now we're going by the paper. I'm not really going by the leather part. I'm really going by the paper underneath here. So I have the paper matched up on the edges. And once it's good, push this down. And then a little bit of glue might squish out the ends. Just wipe that on a rag. And then after you have done that, then you want to make sure that your liner is not overstuck. You want to make sure that it's still going to the end when you push it this way, that it's still going to the end of your book block. If not, you may want to pick it up and tug it a little bit to break free the glue on this side. You're not moving the paper underneath, hopefully, but that's stuck on now. So that's our edge lined cover. The leather goes under about this far, and yet you can't really see it. And because of the way we tapered it, you can't really see it here either. It's because I tapered that edge also. So some people like to see a big old fat piece of leather underneath there so that they can sleep at night, but I don't care. I like it to look finished. Okay, so I'm going to do my other side. Sorry if I sounded insensitive. Okay. So I'll just match up that paper. All right. Get that glued down. Okay. All right, now we're ready to put it in our book press and add the rest of our material here. Okay, so now we've got the Bible in the book press. I have it marked at the top where I'm going to put the ribbons. You notice that I did not put the edges of the liner. I did not put the liner down inside the press. I left those hanging free. That's the way you want to do it. Also notice that my my press is a little bit open at the top and it's a little more narrow at the bottom, and the reason that I do that is I don't want the paper to get marked by the edges of the press, so I didn't put any pressure at the top like this. I got the let's see, so you can see. It's a little bit narrower at the bottom, a little bit bigger here, so that the pressure is here at the bottom on the Bible. Okay, so that'll keep you from getting any marks on the side of your nice paper here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and glue this. I have this stuff already cut out. This is pretty much identical to the other process of doing it with the paper liner from the previous video. In some ways it's easier. Just going to go ahead, I chose a couple of copper ribbons to match the interior lines and the edges of the Bible. Careful not to get anything on your gilding. Okay. So this actually sticks a little bit easier onto the leather than it does on the leatherette paper. I'll flip it around to the other side. Okay, now that's all stuck down. And now put on our tail bands, head and tail bands. And then we put that on. Okay, there we go. Other side. Alright. And if you look at it up in an angle from this way, it helps you to be able to see if you got it on there straight. It's kind of hard to capture that on the video. But now we're going to let that dry, and after this is dry, then we'll add on the rest of the spine reinforcement, and that's all in the previous video, and then we'll show you what we're going to do when we're ready to build the full YAP cover. Okay, I've had some questions on the last video about how I make this spine reinforcement, and I use a plastic material for that, and these are just leaves off of a big heavy-duty plastic folder. What I've done is I've sanded with a real heavy grit sandpaper. I think it was like 100 grit or 80 grit sandpaper with an electric sander. I sanded both sides really good and then cleaned it off. And then what I do is I cut them into 2-inch strips. I cut them into 2-inch strips, and then I roll them really tight as I can get them. And I tie a piece of rope or leather around it, and then I boil this for 5 minutes. After I've boiled this for 5 minutes, and then I rinse it off in cool water, and then whenever it comes out, it keeps this nice rounded shape. And then I can cut this down even further to make strips that are used for my spine reinforcement. Now in the last video I used 1/2-inch wide pieces for the Bibles. They were personal size Bibles. This is a smaller Bible, so you're not going to need as much reinforcement, so I'm only using 1/4-inch wide strips on this, and I've already cut 2 pieces here. And then just like in the last video, we're going to use this contact cement to glue those on. And then once those are set in place, then I'll take another piece of black cloth that we showed in the last video, and we just put it right over the top of this. And it's cut at 1/8 of an inch wider than the spine of the Bible, so it's going to overlap onto the leather 1/8 of an inch on each side approximately. And that helps to kind of tie everything together. You'll notice on store-bought Bibles that they put paper on the back of the spine right here. We don't use paper for that, so it's going to make a higher quality binding. Okay, so now the Bible is finished. It has all the spine reinforcement on it. It has the leather liner on it, and it's ready now for the cover. So I'm going to show how to measure for a full yap. For a full yap, that means that the edges of the cover will touch together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from one edge of the Bible to the other, and that's 1.25 inches. So that's how big I'm going to make my Bible. Now actually I can do a full 1.25 inches, or if I want them to just barely, maybe not quite touch together but look still pretty full, then I can go back 1/8 of an inch. So on this one, I'm just going to go the full 1/8 and just make it kind of like where it'll barely overlap a little bit if you were to push it down together. So 1.25 inches. So I'm going to start on my 0 mark on my mat. I'm at my 0 mark on my mat here. I just roll it over just like I did on the first video. Roll it over. I'm landing on, I'm going to move it up this way to the 1/8 inch mark because it's a little bit over the inch. And now I'm going to add to that, I'm going to add 1.25 inches, which will come out to 10 3/8 of an inch. After I get that measurement, I write it down. You can write it on the cover if you like. 10 3/8 of an inch. And now I'm going to go to my 0 mark on the bottom, and I'm going to add 1.25 inches here. This is pretty close to my 1/2 inch mark, so I'm just going to go with that. Add 1.25 inches, which will be 6 7/8. 6 7/8. And then for my spine, I'm going to measure the paper that's going to go across this spine. And basically pinching my fingers together, just like on the last video, here to here. 1.5 looks like 1.5 plus 1/16, so I call that 1.5 strong. Let's measure the other side, see how it looks. I'm going to say 1.5 strong, just 1.5 and 1/16 added. 1 1/2, and then I write an S like this so it's not confused with a 5. And then I measure from end to end on my tail bands here. And it's going to be 5 3/4 of an inch. 5 3/4 of an inch. Okay. So now I'm going to cut that material and put it together. to find the center. Mark the center of my cloth. And now I'm going to cut my paper, spine. And this is the spine paper that we used in the last video, except this one's black. This at 5 3/4. Okay, now I'm going to mark my ribs. I'm going to do 5 ribs. I'm just going to do 1 inch apart. And I'm still going to do the 1/4 inch ribs. And I'm going to do the wraparound style ribs on this. So I'm marking center on each end. And then I'm going to put those on my cloth. Trace it on here. I just eyeballed it end to end to where it looked like the same measurement on each side. If you were to measure it with a ruler, you'd find it's good. Okay, now we're gonna glue. I'm just gonna glue this. And then I'm going to mark my lines where I'm going to put my ribs. Okay, so it's not really going to be... Okay, so let me show you the next part here. I'm just going to go ahead. This is going to be 1 1/4 inch. It's going to be like a 5/8 inch yap. Yes, 5/8 inch yap. So for a 5/8 inch yap, I use this coin. This is an Australian penny. It's about the size of a $half. So this one actually comes out to 1 1/4 inch. And then basically what I'm going to do to make sure that I got that nice big round corner for my yap, I'm just going to cut off Okay, so next I'm just going to explain what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to draw my lines for my ribs here. I'm going to cut my ribs, I'm going to cut this here to make my hinge, here and here. I'm going to spread it apart. I'm going to glue my ribs on there all across, and then at that point I'll be ready to cut my leather. Okay, so this leather right here is about 1.5 millimeters thick. It's probably 3 ounces in weight. This is Butterball cow skin. So I wanted to go with a little bit thicker leather so that you could kind of see how I work with that. Anything that you go that's going to be thinner is going to be easier than this. So we're going a 5/8 inch yap. So with a 5/8 inch yap, the rule is you always add 3/8. That's my rule. So 5/8 plus 3/8, that's 1 inch exactly. Okay, so I'm going to use my big clear ruler to mark 1 inch. Another easy way to do this would be just to measure it this way. And I'm going to add 1 inch on that side and 1 inch on this side. So my measurement's going to be 2.5 strong. So 12.5 strong this way. And then this way, 8 7/8. Okay. There's 12.5. We're going to get 13.5 strong because I'm on my 1 inch mark. Okay. There's my leather. And 1 inch. Around all the sides. This is going to be where I'm going to glue it. All right, now for this next part, I'm going to, this is the size diameter that I use. Maybe something bigger. This one. This is the one. So this is the spool that I use to mark how big of a cutoff. And so what I'm looking for here is that whatever that arc is, it's going to be an even amount of space from here to here. That's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to find the right size. So it just happens to be this size. I suppose I could measure it, tell you exactly how wide it is. It's almost 3 inches. So it's just short of 3 inches. Okay. Now after that, this is where I'm going to cut off basically that corner wherever I marked that. And then I do a little part there and a little part there. Part here. Okay. Now at this point, I'm ready to do my skiving or my paring on the edges of the leather. And then we're going to do a special deal on the corners of this. And I'm going to go ahead and mark it where we're going to do the corner work. And I'm going to explain my markings here on this in a little bit, but basically we're going to thin all of this leather in this area for this large yap. I basically just take a bite out of the corner. Okay. Okay. So I'm paring this leather. I'm going to do 2 sides in a corner so you can see it. I'm spare you doing all the sides. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take 1 pass, and then I'll take a 2nd pass. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing on this side. It's really a good idea to go back to your leather strop. Every time you go to a new side, this leather wears out your blade really fast, if not. Okay, 2nd pass. Okay, and now I'm going to show you on this corner. So in this corner, I have a line basically drawn from here like this. This is just like a 45-degree angle of the corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off 1 layer of leather in like 3 strips. So I'm going to go like this way. And I'm going to basically take it all off even. And then after I do that, then I'm going to focus on this outside edge to about right here. And I'm going to make this outside edge really thin in this area. This will be super thin right here in this area. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and strop this one more time before I do it. Okay, so I'm going to start right here. Basically, I got my knife kind of down flat. I'm bending it sort of at an angle. This is going to take practice, so I'll just tell you now. So I took off 1 layer there. 2, 3. I'm going all the way up to that 45-degree line that I had drawn. So that took about 4 passes. It feels pretty even to me. like when you run your hand down it like this, if you feel a big bump somewhere, you can go over that spot again. But basically this is even now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus now on this outside edge, and I want to get it real thin. So that'll make that edge disappear. And feel it with your finger, and it's super thin all the way around that area. You want to keep some meat in the middle, and that'll help your corner to look nicer at the end. So here you'll notice that around this edge area it has a different texture than the leather that's here in this area, and this leather in this area has a different texture than what is in this area, because the further you get away from the very top coat of leather here, the looser the fibers in the leather get. And so whenever you're cutting, to help you see how deep you are, the texture of the leather will actually be consistent. So if I had a place in there where the leather looked an inconsistent texture than the rest of this, it could be because it's a different thickness. And you can actually feel it also. So you can see here, this is a different texture. It almost looks smooth in this area right here, because I'm very close to the top edge of the leather. It's actually very, very thin, paper thin in this area. And so that'll disappear nicely whenever we do our folding. I'm going to do all these other sides and these other corners, and then I'll go ahead and show you how we glue this on. Okay, so now we've got all of the edges finished and all of the corners tapered. We've paired all the corners and everything, and it's all ready to go. So what I did is I laid it back down inside of my lines that I had, and I went over my lines again just so that I could see where the corners were, and then I marked the edges with these lines so that whenever I lay this down, I lay it down in the exact same place. So now I'm ready to glue this, and we're gonna remove this that has my ribs on it now, set that aside, and we're ready to glue this. I'm just staying inside of my lines where I've drawn with the marker. If you go a little bit over, it's okay. Okay, just make sure you don't have any dry spots. And when I did this part, because I have such a large surface area to glue, I used the one that has the mixed glue so that I have a little bit longer drying time. Okay, and this glue sticks really well to my cotton material. And so the reason that I use this is it kind of tells the leather what to do. So now I just lay it down with my marks in the center, line them up, then I line up my outside on one side, make sure it lines up on the other side. I'm going to take my wax paper, put it on top so it doesn't get glue all over everything. flip it over, and then I can work on the ribs. So I'm going to go ahead and work on these ribs and get them ready, and then we'll start doing the fold ins and the corner work. Okay, so I've finished tooling in my ribs, and these are ready to go. At this point, I could go ahead and do the stamping, but I'm going to wait and do that at the end. So I'm just going to show you how we do the edges and the corners right now. So we just flip it over here. Everything is glued down. There's no tape on here because these wraparound ribs tied everything together, so I don't have to remove any tape. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my roller, and my finger kind of finds an edge of the leather where that cloth is. Remember I told you the cloth kind of tells the leather what to do. So it finds that place. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow it with the roller where my finger is finding that edge, and at the same time roll it down. And I'm going to do that on all four sides. And it kind of helps to do it on this porcelain tile because it sort of sticks to it. If I'm doing it on a wax paper or something, it would slide all over the place. Okay. Alright, so now I've got those edges folded down. I take the same piece of wax paper that I had earlier, and I'm going to now just glue down all four of these edges. I'm going to work kind of fast because we already covered this basically on the other video. But we are doing an extended yap, so there's nothing really special about this. I am kind of doing it at an angle inward. I'm not gluing all the way to the edges. So on this part, I'm pulling down with one hand and I'm pushing down with the other. I'm just working my way down. Because it is a big yap, it stays down really easy. You may notice in the video that it looks a little bit crooked, like this is a little bit shorter than this side. That's part of the reason why that we do that 3/8 of an inch extension, because it gives you room for little errors like that. But because we taper the edges, you're not going to see that difference in your finished cover. Okay. Okay, once you've got all four sides glued down and you've rolled them with your roller, now at this point the glue is still tacky, so you can still remove it a little bit, and what you want to do is open up these corners for the yap. Open them up. And that's going to give you room to work on all four of these sides. Okay, so for this part, we're just going to put glue inside that yap now and brush it on. I like to use a small brush and just coat the inside of this. If you need extra time to work, you can use the mixed glue for this part. I use the full strength because I usually do it pretty fast. And so once I go there, now you'll kind of see where these two will sort of meet together in a corner here. That's where I start. Just a little bit to the left this way is where I will start. So that's my starting point, and then I'm just going to go around from there. And you want these pleats to be even. Okay. Now on this right here, you can kind of see that it looks a little bit bigger on the left hand side than it does on the right hand side here. So if at this point that you feel like you want to move it around a little bit, you can rearrange these pleats like this and move them from one side, kind of shift them over to the other side. And then if they look crooked, you can actually comb them with this tool like this. Okay, once we get that corner kind of where we want it, and then I can... Okay, so I'm going to take my hammer, I'm going to kind of tamp everything down. So I start at the outside edges and I kind of hammer in like this. Pretty sure it's the same as what I showed on the last video, but I'm going in at an angle like this. And then when I get to the inside part here, you're going to kind of angle your hammer head down like this, so that I'm sort of hitting it with the bottom corner of the hammer. I'm going to work that corner down. So I made the outside edges of that leather really thin so that whenever I hammer this, that corner is just going to disappear. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see it again. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start right here. And I'm just going to go around. Okay, again, I'm running into that situation where it looked a little bit lopsided. So I can just take and rearrange them a little bit this way. And now you can see, if you get glue on this cloth part, doesn't matter, it's not a finished product there. That's all going to get covered with the liner. So that's basically what I want. I want it to look even in this way. Okay. If you get glue all over your pleats like this, then you'll just need a rag. and clean that off. And now when I'm doing that, I'm just cleaning off the head of the hammer, make sure it doesn't have glue on it. And you can moisten a towel and get that glue residue off of the leather. Okay, so that one looks good. I'm going to finish these other two corners and then we're going to start on tooling the cover. Okay, so when I'm doing my tooling work, I'm going to show you how to do the tool line on the inside of the liner. And so this is about the size of the silver dollar, and this looks like it's going to be about the size that we need. And so I'm just basically making a faint impression with the edge of the coin right now to give me a starting point for my tool lines. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tail end of my tweezers. It has like a polished edge here, and this works pretty well to do these tooling lines. So what I'm going to do is heat it up with my torch for a little bit. About 30 seconds. If it's when it gets hot enough where it's uncomfortable to touch it, almost where it burns you, it's about hot enough. Okay, and then I'm just going to put my straight edge, line it up so that the outside edge of my tweezers is going to hit the outside edge of that line that I made with the coin. And I'm basically just joining those two arcs together. And so that's one side. Do all four sides. Last side. You can also do this process on the outside of the cover as well. I don't think I'm going to do it on the outside of the cover. For the outside corner, I'm just using the same coin and carefully joining those two side lines together. And then these faint lines that are left from the coin around the edges, you can kind of rub that out. The leather is pretty forgiving, so if you make a line that you don't like, you can always put a straight edge on it and go over that one little section again to straighten it out, like I just did. You can use your bone folder, kind of rub out those spots from the coin where it made an impression. Okay, two more. After we're finished with these corners, we're going to do some lettering on the spine. Okay, one more. Okay, at this point we're ready to do the lettering. Okay, so I've loaded my letterpress with my letters. I have just a Holy Bible in here in upper and lowercase letters, and I have this machine set at about 300 degrees. It'll actually take the heat out of the machine with this letterpress or letter set holder that I just put in there. It'll take some of the heat out of the machine, so this temperature will go down just slightly. I want it to be under 300 degrees. The temperature is a little bit higher that I find typically to do copper lettering. And then on our cover, if you'll follow me over here, on our cover, whenever I do, so I want to put Holy Bible right here. So what I've done with my bone folder, I just define the edges of that spine so that I can easily find the center between those two edges. And then I'm going to put Ben's Bibles down here at the bottom. So I've done the same thing down there with the bone folder to just let me see where I can make it center. And then on my stamping machine over here, what I've done is I have two lights that I got at Walmart, and I just clamped these onto the side of my machine. And I find that without lighting right underneath it, it's really hard sometimes to see where I need to put the lettering. And so whenever you're doing this part, what you're going to want to do is going to look at it in two directions. I'm going to look at it from the side this way to make sure that it's centered in between the two ribs, and then this way I'm just going to look underneath and make sure that it's centered from left to right on there. Okay, so let me center that up real quick. Okay, I got it centered left to right. I'm going to look from the side. And then once I've got it centered left to right here, and then I look at it from this way, I got centered left to right here. Then I'll look down and make sure that it's tilted right so that it's even with my ribs. So it looks like I have to twist it a little bit. Once you move it again this way, then you want to go back and check your other settings one more time. You might need to adjust a little bit again. But that looks pretty much where I want it right there. And so before I really give it a press, I'm just going to lightly touch it, and it will leave a faint impression of Holy Bible underneath there. And I'm gonna visually inspect that and see if it looks like it's where I want it. If I don't like it, I can make a small adjustment and repress it down, and it looks a little bit better right there. And if you want to blind stamp, then this is pretty much it. I would just give it a good hard press at this point, and you want to be at least 250 to 300 degrees on that. So that's what a blind stamp impression would look like. And then if you want to add color, at this point I would add my foil. And you don't want to be holding it down on the foil for a long time. You just want to give it a quick press. And I usually do at least a couple of layers. And you can check your foil and look at it in the light and see if it looks like all of it came off. If it did, if you've got a good clean removal of the foil on this, then you're going to have plenty of foil down on your leather. Now for a tip that you can use for blind stamping is if you're blind stamping on black leather, if you use black foil, then you'll get a cleaner looking blind stamp. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat this process for putting Ben's Bibles at the bottom, and then we're going to show gluing the cover on. Okay, so now I've stamped my lettering on here, and it looks pretty clean. You do see a little bit of foil in between, like the I, the little I, and the little B. There's a little bit of foil in between there that doesn't really belong there. And then down here on Ben's Bibles, you can see there's a little bit of a foil line underneath the word that I didn't want to be there. So there's a couple ways that you can clean this up. First thing that you need to try is just put a piece of Scotch tape over the top. You don't want to smash the Scotch tape down into the lettering. You just want it to hit the lettering that is around it. So if you put a deep impression in your lettering, then whenever you rub this tape on there like this, it's not going to grab all of your foil and tear it out. And so once you get it to where it's went over it like that, and then just peel it off, and you might see that on your tape there might be a little bit of foil. There's not any on there on this one. Try it on this one now. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just giving it a little rub with my finger. I'm not pushing it down into the lettering though. And this is just trying to get some of that extra foil off of the edges. And it doesn't look like I really pulled off a lot there. You can do that a couple of times, and if it looks like you're still getting foil off of around where you don't want it to be, that's good. And then another thing that you can do is to get it real clean, you can just get a little bit of oil on your Q-tip here and go around the outside of the area that you just stamped, and you can just kind of rub, and like an eraser, it'll just erase that extra residue around your stamping that you didn't want to be there. If you've got a stubborn spot, so I'm not really digging down into it, because you can actually erase your part of your imprint, so you want to be careful not to shove down into your lettering. If you've got a stubborn spot, you can use the pointed tip on these and get down and give special attention to a small area. So same thing over here. I'm just gonna go over it, and that looks clean now. Okay, so now the next thing that I'm gonna do is done the tooling on the inside, I've done the lettering on the outside. Now I'm ready to put on my put my cover on my Bible. So I'm just gonna fold this hinge there and fold this hinge here. Now you can see it kind of looks a little bit boxy here. Looks a little bit flat. I'm gonna give this a round like that, because it makes a more attractive looking cover. I think Bibles that have a square, even if the Bible itself is square, if you'll put just a little bit of a round in the outside cover, it makes the Bible look more attractive, in my opinion. Okay, so now we've got that ready. Just going to take our little Bible and put it in the middle. We get it as close to where we think that we like it. And then at this point, you can kind of inspect where it's going to land on your corners. And that looks like where I want it to be. Okay. So once you get that cover where you want it to be, then we'll just lay it down and open up the cover like this. I use the full strength glue on this, especially if I'm doing a small Bible like this. But you can use the other glue. The reason that I like this glue is it helps to grab better. And so this is where it's a little bit different than doing the paper cover, okay? In this case, this leather can move around easier than the paper did. So you want to make sure that it stays in place. So sometimes you might have to stretch it a little bit like this. And that's the good thing about that leather, is it will stretch. Okay, so sometimes you might need to stretch it a little bit. You want to cover all the paper underneath. And so as long as your cuts were straight and Sometimes after you've glued your spine paper and everything, you might have a cover that looks like this, where it's like looking really, really crooked. You can still work with that. What you want to do is stretch it back in place where it's supposed to be. You might have to pull and give it special attention in that way. But basically what we want it to do is lay back down as close to this as we can. And then you're going to hold it. You need to hold it with your hand like this, because when I start gluing, my brush can grab that leather and pull it like this very easily. So I'm going to hold it with one hand firmly here so that it doesn't slide around. Okay, and then I'll show you how we do this. Now I've got my glue on there. You want to make sure that you have a generous amount of glue on the leather. It takes a little bit more glue than when you're doing a paper liner, because it does soak into the leather a little bit more. And so once I got it spread on the inside middle part of this liner, and then I'm going to focus on this part here at the spine. Actually, I have a bead of glue back here, and the reason that I put extra glue in that area is because this is the high stress area where the cover is actually attached to the Bible, and that's where you're going to have the most pressure to want to try to separate. Okay, and then I'm gluing this part now. You don't want to get glue on this part of the spine, but you can get glue on the edge of this cloth that is on the spine. And then if it starts to dry out on you, you can add some more glue. You can add some more glue and just go over it again. Okay, but what I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to want to pull it out from the middle of the cover to the outside edges, and I'm going to work my way all the way around. And then if there's any glue, looks like it's starting to dry in the middle area, then I'm just going to go over it with my wet brush again to just make it wet again so that it'll stick well to my cloth. If your brush feels like it's getting dry, it's a good idea to just get some more glue on it. Okay, you noticed I've let go with one hand. You can do that as long as you're pushing outward like this. Be careful not to get glue on your ribbons when you're doing this part. Okay, now that it's wet, if it moves a little bit on your Bible here, it's okay. Try to get it back where it looks like it's supposed to be. And now I'm going to bring it down. Just touch it, bring it up, see if it's where I like it. You can move it around at this point a little bit. Hopefully you don't have to move it too much. If you have to move it a lot, you might have done something wrong. So anyways, that looks where I want it. I'm going to put it back down, and now I'm going to press this way so that the spine of the cover is hugging firmly against the spine of the Bible. And then we're going to go from the center out. And I'm putting pressure from the center and pushing out. Center, pushing out. Try to do that. Flip it over. You should have had a little bit of glue squish out on the sides. With your terry cloth rag, you can wipe the edges. If it looks like it's leaving a lot of glue residue behind, you can slightly moisten that, and it'll help you get more of that glue residue off. Then you can also smooth it with your hand like this. You might feel like when you're doing this part that you're starting to get an air bubble back here in the back where it's starting to come off a little bit. That's okay. The glue's still wet. So just lay it back down, and then you're going to press it here again. And you can push out air bubbles like this. Okay, so now that I've glued one side, I'm going to move to the other side. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to go a little bit faster this time. added a little bit of glue because it felt like my brush was starting to get dry. If you have areas where it looks like you missed a little bit of glue, just go back. If it looks like it's getting dry around the edges, go back, go over it again. Just want everything to look wet before you get your cover now, put it on, bring it up, see if you need to move it around where you like it. Okay, I'm going to put it back down. Try to keep the glue off of your hands so it doesn't get on the leather or get on the gilding of the edges of the pages. So here I'm just pressing it again this way, get it firmly on there, going from the center out. Okay. Wipe off anything that squeezes out. Okay. So we're basically finished now. What I'm going to do at this point is I can push that yap down and work toward the corner like this. Same thing on the other side. And then I can do it on the other side in the back. Same thing. And I'm pushing toward the corner and then pushing toward the corner like this. And you should feel it on the side that that cover is coming together. And if you look, that's a full yap. It's touching together. Full yap, it's touching together here. And it's touching together here. So it's nice and even all the way around. And then you can wrap this. I like to wrap it with bubble wrap. If you use paper and you wrap it too tightly with paper, that paper can leave lines in your leather. That if you have soft leather that is been moistened from the glue, that'll leave lines in your leather, and it's kind of hard to get those lines out sometimes. So I actually recommend just letting it sitting and drying like this, and then after it's dried for maybe a day, then you can wrap it. And usually what I do is I wrap these before I send them to the customer, and I'll wrap a piece around this way, and I'll wrap a piece around this way, all the way around, and just tape it. And then it'll kind of be trained by the time it gets to the customer. But that's a full yap Bible. Looks beautiful, looks good. And this is ready to sell.